Hi, welcome to my video titled Renaming Standards, Decolonial Approaches in Cultural and Literary Education. So, why should we include decolonialism in high school curriculum? Why is it important when there's so much space needed to talk about the correct way to read, to write? So, why should we make space for it? Well, living in a world of intersections, it's difficult as a student to immediately understand the complexities of culture and histories that are intertwined within a text without the guidance of an educator. Hi, my name is Sarah Paller, and today's video blog will highlight the importance of educating students on the cultural, social, and historical knots that bind us to our peers, our educators, and to the narratives themselves. So, some takeaways I hope that you'll get from today's video will be some important vocab within cultural rhetoric and decolonialism, a summary of how discourse has led to decolonialism as a framework, and an example lesson plan with some great writing assignments that are reflexive and multimodal. So, cultural rhetoric is a discipline that focuses on community driven designs and methodologies, ensuring that researchers remain accountable to the people and cultures they study. It's not enough to merely identify and reimagine cultural differences. We are called upon to protect and uphold ethical accountability towards the communities we engage with. And we'll definitely go over some researchers and authors who are doing just that. Um, In your classrooms, culture permeates the social and political spheres that students encounter, and it's time to help them redefine the cultural knots that both bind and unravel within texts and audiences. A cultural rhetoric is our starting point, but it should not be our end point. We must acknowledge, and we will be acknowledging throughout today's video blog, that cultural productions, whether it be text, images, videos, music, have long been molded by colonial mindsets, which strategically erased native stories, indigenous practices, what intellect is, and languages. So, James Berlin, who is a notable rhetorician, writes this text that talks about the postmodern shift of the 1980s. He talks about how the influx of immigrants heavily influenced the cultural, economic, and political fabric of the US, which also had this shift in attitude in education. What is the literary canon? Why are the classics still being taught? The discourse, surrounding what is being taught in the classroom is changing, and it is a direct symptom of this influx of immigration. So here he is talking about we see an influx starting in 1970s, a huge jump from 1970s to the 80s, another big jump from the 80s to the 90s. But after he wrote this book, we see a very huge increase from the 90s into the 2000s. So if the 1980s, heavily shifted people's attitudes on our standards of English, of reading and writing in a classroom, how have they changed now when immigration has been steadily increasing and continues to increase? How has it changed classrooms, and how can we keep up with the changing demographics of our students and their worlds that they live in? So, what is post colonial and decolonization? What is the difference? They're used so interchangeably. This would be a great way to kickstart the conversations. The easiest way to describe the differences is that one, post colonial, is a more passive approach and methodology, while the other, decolonization, is about action. So, postcolonial is an adjective that is used to describe something related to the time after colonialism. We are discussing the period following the end of colonial rule in various countries and the cultural, political, and social impacts that come with it. So, we're thinking of postcolonial methodology as a list of observations of what is left over after colonial rule, a look at what has been taken from a native people and what has been added. A great literary example that you can use in the classroom would be Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. A quote where he talks about how clever the white man is. He came with his quietly and peaceably with his religion. They were amused at his foolishness, allowed him to stay, but now he has won our brothers, and our clan can no longer act like one. He has put a knife on the things that held us together, and we have fallen apart. Through his character's voice, the author describes how far their culture has disintegrated because of colonialism. So, how can we define a decolonization? It is the act or practice of decolonizing. It involves a process where a nation establishes and maintains its independence from a colonizing power. The term is often associated with the period after World War II, when many regions of the world, particularly in Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean, gained independence from European colonial powers. This also extends to the mental and cultural aspects, such as our efforts to decolonize one's mind from the colonizer's values and practices. So while post-colonial is an adjective, decolonization is a process. Actions are taking place. We are questioning, we are challenging dominant narratives that have been historically imposed on marginalized communities. Here is a short list of some other definitions that would be great to highlight for your students. Coloniality is a label for lasting power dynamics within our current social, political, and cultural systems. This can include education, erasure of customs and language, dispossession of land and resources, and so much more. While counter narrative is a form of decolonization. This is where the author tells a story that disrupts what has been previously taught as our real histories of a colonized area or people. The written word becomes more than just a means of communication, but a powerful tool that aims to dismantle systems of power. We have assimilation, which is a practice that occurred in the US by Americans trying to bring Native peoples into their American standard, their white American standard. They would take kids, put them into these boarding schools, teach them English, American, and other Anglo Saxon histories. And then in the summers, when they were not in school, they were placed with white families so they can learn, what it means to be in a white household. This is the standard of living, as compared to where their families and ancestors are from. And then we have hybridity, which is something we will definitely cover in Ansel Dua's Borderlands. This is this kind of idea of multiplicity of identities and modes of being within oneself, whether that's spiritual, physical, being on a border, um, culturally, multiple languages and missing a language, missing pieces of your culture, because of this blend of people caused by immigration, caused by colonial rule. You know, um, these are great to highlight before you dive into uh, any kind of text that deals with identity. So, in the text of Gloria Anzaldúa, Victor Villanueva, which we'll highlight later, Angela Haas, and a couple other researchers, they use their own lives to discuss the influence of colonialism at the intersection of race, gender, class, and sexuality. Here we have a picture of a front cover of Victor Villanueva's work called Bootstraps. This novel sheds light on the classroom's impact on children, especially those whose and linguistic backgrounds are often misunderstood. Villanueva details his journey to reacquire academic writing skills in American English as he moved from Puerto Rico into the US. His journey was fraught with challenges as his intelligence and cultural experiences were overlooked by educators. His narrative underscores the urgency for literacy and intelligence to transcend the American standard. Um, he he addresses this important term called internal colonialism, which he defines as the enduring effects of colonialism that weigh heavily on people of color. He explores how racism hinders academic achievement by curtailing educational opportunities, something he experienced within his own story. And he examines how language use, literacy, and intelligence among people of color is different, but it is still intelligence. And that we need to broaden um, our context of what being literate means, and trying to get away from English only movement when there are students who have this kind of multilingualism, multiculturalism within their experiences. Here are three examples of some recent research that is being done with some decolonial frameworks. You feel free to read them yourself to help engage with, you know, why this is important for your curriculum. Feel free, you can use them in the classroom. I will talk about Angela Haas's wampum as a hypertext essay within the concrete assignments. But you can use these in the classroom, but these are more for how we are integrating decolonial frameworks into research, not just into literature. So how has Angela Haas's essay is a counter narrative on the origins of hypertext and multimedia. We have previously known it um, as the origin to be from Anglo-Saxon Western white male uh, who created this technology that acts as a memory, while the wampum belts predate his invention and is a collective memory talking about tribal records that discuss relationships between other tribes, between tribes and colonists. So just rewriting and giving a different history than we have been taught within our classrooms, how indigenous knowledge is important and has influenced us. Um, The second essay, the very long title, it talks about more about how Hawaii Creole English and corporate tourism have influenced each other, and how that has to do with remix and also copyright law. Um, Kind of something you may not want to use in the classroom, but what is important about this article is the author's uh, my initial concern about cultural appropriation, because the authors are locals of Hawaii, but not native Hawaiians. But they bring a nuanced understanding to the cultural productions involving Hawaii Creole English, but are very respectful, very transparent about their identity, who they are, why they come to understand it, why it might be different from other people's. Very important on how to be ethically accountable with communities you are engaging with that aren't necessarily someone a group you belong to. And the third one, um, is by Malia Powell, The Rhetorics of Survivance, How American Indians Use Writing. So this discussion extends to the examination of rhetoric of survivance. She sheds light on the experiences of American Indian writers, Sarah Winnemucca Hopkins and Charles Alexander Eastman, who navigate colonial discourse to assert their narratives with depth and complexity. So this is teaching us how to analyze rhetoric. Um, Something you can use in your classroom or something you can use as a tool as yourself on how to encourage and support your students on how to write about this difficult topic. Like I said, these would be very important for you as a resource. You can use them in the classroom. It's really up to you what you have time for. Maybe make this optional reading. We know how students feel about that. So I really want you to use this as educators as a resource to inform yourself on how to teach this curriculum. So this is a timeline worksheet I created for students to work on in class in small groups of about three or four. Um, this timeline worksheet can be done anytime after the students have read past chapter 3, because that's where she really talks about the historical events that have led to her discussion on Borderlands. So we move through the different historical events, the different eras. I've highlighted events she discusses, and I left blank spaces. So this is where the group work comes in. The students are going to be asked to identify terms you use to describe these events, um, who is involved in these events, and what are the implications, whether it's language, cultural, um, you know, what are the implications of these occurrences? Uh, and it gives them a chance to work with other students to get through this tough material. It allows you as a teacher to move from group to group, to support them, to help them understand different things, but they are leading their own, support group between each other on how to tackle all this historical information. So please feel free to use this in your classroom if you are going to talk about Borderlands, or if you just use this as a framework to create your own timeline of a different text. I think this is just really helpful to students who are definitely being introduced to decolonial narratives for the first time. So, in the next in class assignment using Borderlands, we are asking the students to bring in a passage from the text that uses a language they are not familiar with. In my case, it'll be Spanish. Um, we are going to be actively doing decolonial work as a part of her text because she is speaking to specific people who can understand both English and Spanish. And if we are to understand her and this idea of hybridity and the physical, spiritual borderlands within all of us, we need to do the work such as translating text we do not understand. So that is what we'll be doing today, using generative AI as our tool so students can learn how to use it in a manner that is ethical and honest in their educational journey. How do we get students to use it as a research tool? So, step one, we are going to ask the student to introduce themselves, who they are, why they are researching, and the portion of text they wish to translate. So, that is our first prompt. And our response, we get our translation, we even get a little extra analysis of the translated passage, so sentence. And the next step is to connect it. So, how do we connect this translation to her overall themes? So, that is our next prompt. And we in response we do get hybridity and identity, which are very important themes within that sentence and within the whole. So students are getting that um, uh, with some evidence that's highlighted. Here we tell them make sure they're cautious of the evidence that ChatGPT spits out, and always ensure with using the text that that is true factual evidence. um, the next step is that we are asking them to help us get more cultural context of any terms we don't understand. In this example, it is going to be la chingada, which is a term I am not familiar with. So I'm going to ask ChatGPT for some academic sources that discuss la chingada because I want some more cultural context. So I have three sources. This is a great spot if you haven't talked about it already, how students can identify reliable online sources. We are looking at who's publishing, who owns the website, who's writing, when it was published, things like that. This would be a great time to plug that into your curriculum if you haven't already. But just a great time to remind them uh, of how to use academic sources you get online. Um, And then we're gonna start leading them into the following assignment, which would be a writing assignment, um, which you'll be giving the prompts after this. Let's have the students keep in mind these prompts, these writing assignment prompts, and let's have them do just a little more specific research that they might be interested in. So I have three prompts. One's talking about decolonial perspective, one's talking about identity and hybridity, and the other is looking at the poetry used within her novel. Um, so giving the students a couple different avenues for them to explore within generative AI. And then the fifth one, a very important step, let's get back into groups. It doesn't have to be the same one, and let's share your research. um, Maybe there's differing things. If they did have the same passage, we can talk about that. But then they can also talk about how they can use, the research they received from generative AI. How can they use that to kickstart the one of the three writing assignments? How can they incorporate it into an essay or into making their own poem, which is the third prompt? How so that when they leave this classroom after this assignment, they have a great foundation for when they need to go write at home or wherever they're writing. If they, do have access to a computer, they know how how to help themselves with the research by using generative AI. But they also already have some great research that they can use. Um, Please feel free to use as little or as much of this as you want to. Um, Change it for different text, for different goals you have in your classroom. Still, just a guide to get you started. So here is the list of writing prompts that will kind of be the final assignment of the lesson plan with Enzel Dua. And so we have one talking about significant passages. This is where the student select 3 to 4 passages that highlight these themes that we are dealing with in her text. We want them to write an essay about their initial reactions to reading these passages, how they are connected to the entire novel, how she changes the style of narrative as opposed to other texts we have read or you have read in the semester, assuming that this is not your first text. And then we have more of a reflective version where the student is asked to reflect on their own cultural identities and experience. How do they relate and differ from the themes in Borderlands? How has the book's themes challenge your view of Borderlands or enhance your understanding of these experiences and your own with identity and hybridity, if that pertains to you? Then we have more of a creative approach. So here the student is being asked to create a poem that focuses on multiculturalism and that plays with structure and imagery. We see how Enzel Dewey uses poetry within her prose. She has meaningful breaks and spacing. Um, we want the student to explore that, create their own, and then give us a short little blurb on, you know, why they chose to do this, how their work connects to Enzel Dewey's. So having these three different avenues for students to write about, gives them an opportunity to highlight their strengths, whether that's analyzing, whether it is being, attuned to their own reflections, or just being more creative. So, you know, different students will want to highlight different things, and this shows that they're still dealing with the material just in their own way. Discussed earlier, Angela Haas writes this amazing essay talking about how um, multimedia origins started with wampum belts created by various indigenous tribes. So it is a great way to highlight what a counter narrative is because Haas is effectively rewriting history that we were given and being taught. So, and she places indigenous knowledge that predated any um, Western Anglo Saxon idea of hypertext and multimedia. um, and she places it at the beginning. So here we have some images from her essay that both depict these belts, how, although they are beautiful, they are records detailing relationships between tribes, between the tribes and other colonial powers. So I think it is a great essay to put into any discussion about decolonization, about counter narratives, and a great way to get students of all ages to start thinking of ways they can tell their own story. So, to add more value to this essay, let's have them, I mean, to this essay, let's have the students try to tell their own story using different materials. They can make something physical like a belt, or if they'd rather do something research based, have them research and present wampum belts they are finding. Um, so we can also create a guide similar to how I created one with the Gen AI to do some archival research into wampum belts. And they can do a deep dive into the meaning, what this belt was specifically used for, um, to give more, cultural and historical impact to this essay. It's important to incorporate decolonial work into the classroom, um, while making sure we are using these cultural materials with immense sensitivity and respect. As previously stated, it is important to keep in mind sensitivity and respect. We do have an ethical um, accountability to our fellow students, to our educators, to their families on how to address very sensitive topics. In this example, we are going to say, how do we talk about writing about slavery, teaching about slavery? Of course, this depends on the different state you're in and their rules, but giving them some preferred terms and using good sources. This source is from the NAACP website. You know, how can we help students effectively talk about enslavement? So here's a guide. Of course, I'll include the link, but this is how scholars are writing about enslavement. So, language to consider, adopting terms. Here are some terms that are using instead. And then, language to consider avoiding. Avoiding, this is what, you know, you will not tolerate being spoken or written within your classroom. So it can also talks about principles to consider, things to avoid, things to honor and consider, things to be mindful of, um, practices to adopt, and then some important resources that students can use, you can use in your classroom. Uh, this, trying to find these, maybe try having to build your own, that's a lot, but looking for these types of resources is very important to start off any conversation about, very sensitive subjects, which is pretty much everything when you're talking about um, post-colonialism, decolonization, um, making sure that is very clear from the beginning. Um, if any of the writing prompts, throughout your curriculum, you know, might bring up emotional responses from students, do not force them to share in front of a classroom. This is a great way for reflex. This is a great opportunity for reflexive writing assignments because anything that the student discusses will remain between themselves and you as their educator. Um, So here's a list of takeaways I'm hoping um, is something you have grasped at the end of this video. So I provided you a simple history of cultural rhetoric as a study and how it has led to decolonial frameworks. I've given some high-level definitions of important terms involved in teaching post-colonial and decolonization. in the classroom, I have provided lesson plans and some concrete assignments based on decolonial texts that you can use to help your students analyze the tough materials that are within these texts and give them an opportunity to reflect on their own individual understandings. And then, of course, I definitely hope I have highlighted the importance of involving decolonization into your curriculum. It is to the benefit of your students' literary, social, cultural, and individual identities, and how they understand their own identity in relation to their peers, to you, to others they interact with in their daily lives. I hope y'all have a great school year and thank you for joining.